Hello and welcome to the 5-Year Plan Podcast.
Yay!
Pod 222.
Is that a new formation?
You still want to do that. Sponsored by Vector Printing.
You did it last week. Oh no, Jesse did it about 221.
Come on. Yeah. Sponsored by Vector
Best we can do
Printing.
it every week until it adds up to 11.
Please don't. Vector Printing for your printing embroidery needs. Go to vector.co.uk. It's Vector with a
Okay.
Okay.
I can't say the third K. That's
fair point.
politically inappropriate.
And I forget that every week. And JCIS, a global research and brand consultancy from South London. Visit jc-is.com.
I have done.
Oh,
Hey,
nice.
new twist.
Good.
I will.
And that was
I'm
the
just
voice.
worried about the fact if you go, we're going to keep doing it until the pod adds up to 11. That means we've got to do about 300 more. That's a lot of pods, isn't it? Before it starts adding up to 11. That's without goalkeepers, so we make it 10.
Yeah.
So it's going to be pod 4. Oh yeah, a good point.
Yeah.
That's
Three,
what
four,
we'll
four.
give up.
Stead away. That was the voice of Tony Fletcher. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks.
Returning to the pod.
Yes, returning to the pod.
I
Yes.
can't even remember the last time you were on.
I think it was probably December last year. It was after
Just before we sacked Alan Pardew.
It was after Pardew's last game.
Oh, so we've had...
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
But it's before we knew it's Pardew's last game.
Yeah.
No,
So-
I do believe I left you without saying I'd be interested to see if he's manager of our next game, and he wasn't.
Yeah.
Well,
So
you
you
were
could have just
spot
cut that bit out and put that bit in for this one, then it could have been fine.
Kevin Day
Hello.
and Andy Street.
Hi.
Well, so Tony, since you were last on, a lot has happened in
was
the
Palace.
world of Crystal Palace.
It is Palace, isn't it?
What do you make of, I mean, literally the last 24, 48 hours, really, of Palace? The latest line being that, according to various reports, Frank de Boer is hanging on to his job by a thread. What do you make of it?
Well, just to reiterate, I guess it's Palace. I mean, and it is the never a dull moment. I was really, really excited at his appointment, and I always make this point. I'm watching the games from a distance. Like being based in the States, you're not like down the pub every night obsessing about different people's form and so on. But I had every reason to be excited. I could see that people were very nervous about us playing passing football, going for the new formation. But I also felt, look, we've been in the top flight for 4 years. We're going into a record 5th year. It's time to step it up. And if Pardew wasn't the man for it, then maybe Frank de Boer is. But I'm as disappointed as anybody else. I sat through Saturday's game. I watched all 3 games this year, and 2 of them on TV, and sat through Saturdays, and it was miserable.
Yeah.
It was bereft of it was bereft of inspiration. It was bereft of what he called courage. But we don't gain anything from firing managers 3 games into a season. I mean, we already look like serial daters as a club, and it won't do us any favours if that happens.
Yeah. The courage line was interesting, Kevin, wasn't it? Do you think that was something that was lost in translation, or do you think he intended to be calling out his players in that way?
I don't think he meant actual bravery. I think he meant there's a lack of confidence in terms of passing the ball. We can argue, and we probably will till we're blue in the face about all sorts of things. We can't sack them out. If we'll be a laughing stock if we sack Frank de Boer already. We really will. Who are we supposed to attract to the club?
Well, we've
Frank de Boer?
got a manager as a sporting director right now.
Well, let's save that for a later.
But there is rumours about that.
So
isn't
people on the BBS who apparently know more about football and what happened than I do can start licking their pencils and their coloured crayons and getting in their safe rooms to write stuff from behind anonymity. Can't even say anonymousness in their names. So let's leave Doogie for the moment.
Okay.
It's what I find interesting is the irony of so many people on Saturday who said to me, "We have to get rid of De Boer. He only plays one way. He can't play any other way. He can't adapt. We've got to go back to playing the Palace way. What, one way? We have to get a manager who will play the one way you want us to play." Mm-hmm. It comes back to what sort of club do we want to be? Do we want to keep hearing about people we won't stay up? Do we want to be a staying up club? Or do we want to be a club that develops in the Premier League? Because at the moment, through whoever's fault it is, we are already looking to stay up this season, at that early in the season. But what do you want to do? Sack a manager who wants to do things? There are so many questions that don't involve De Boer. It's like, it was his decision to play Joel Ward on the left at the start of the second half. But does that mean it's because he thinks the squad is so threadbare? In which case, is it his fault for not strengthening the squad? Is it the fault of 4 previous managers for leaving us with a threadbare squad? Is it his fault that Kelly comes on and makes 2 stupid mistakes that cost us the game? Because that game was meandering to a 0-0 draw.
Yeah.
Everybody thought so. That game was 2 teams that looked short of confidence, that were playing in front of each other. Maybe we could have nicked a goal, but we ended up making the 2 mistakes that cost us the game. I don't see how on earth that's De Boer's fault. It's quite clear that perhaps people like me overestimated how good the players were, and I still stand by the fact that if players like Benteke, Zaha, Scott Dan, Tompkins, plus the players we brought in, if they can't adapt to a fairly simple change, then again, whose fault is that? Is that the fault of the players, De Boer, or previous managements? It's like it's ludicrous to say we got a manager in and we've got players who can't play that. They're professional footballers. They're Premier League footballers. They can play more than one way, but they've got to have time to do it. We only got him in 6 weeks, but that's the problem. The deep-rooted problem is we only got him in 6 weeks before the season started. He had a half-assed tournament in Hong Kong in 110-degree heat and humidity.
Yeah.
And he had a game here and a game against Schalke.
4 pre-season games.
4 pre-season games. And there are so many people whose fault it is, and he's one of them, but he's not the only person. As simple as that. There's clearly, and how many times do we have to say at the start of the season, there's clearly problems with the infrastructure of the club. There's clearly problems with the way we do our business, on and off. There's clearly problems with our transfer system. There's clearly problems with our scouting. There's clearly problems with our academy, because he's had a look and none of them seem to be good enough, except Lakilo, and he came from Belgium. Mm-hmm. So there's problems all over the place, and he's one of them. But to sack him now would be to sack him now and say, right, we have to admit there's only one way we can play to stay in this division forever. It's upsetting,
depressing.
Can I just go back? You mentioned about the Palace way, and we have had a question about that, which I was saving for part 2, but I'm going to put it in now because it feels quite apt. It's from El Aguila on the BBS, who I think is Mark, that lives in Madrid.
Yes.
How you doing?
Hello, Mark.
It's quite a long one, but I'm going to crack on with it, and it is quite pertinent to what you were saying. There's been a lot of talk about how De Boer's style is contrary to Palace's DNA. However, the manager who started Palace's rise up the leagues in the early 60s, Arthur Rowe, and whose football first attracted huge crowds to Selhurst Park, was one of the great progressive thinkers of the game and a precursor of the Ajax style. The Alisson/Venables side was the great ground filler after that. Should Palace fans and management team learn some history and relent on this painful yearning for a team to be a modern version of the Wimbledon crazy gang? Love the beautiful game. It's the Palace way.
I almost feel like that was a leading question mark.
What do you
question
think?
mark?
What do you think, Andy? To that,
I think, yes, there is an element amongst some of being a tiny bit reactionary about such things, but the problems are pretty much they're deeper than just fundamentals of style. And if all the rumblings are correct about player discontent, once a manager has widespread discontent on the training ground, then he's done for. And it is generally and genuinely as simple as that. And we can sort of talk about how players should be able to adapt and blame things on players, but it's kind of reminiscent of every manager where it's failed, where eventually there's a recourse to a certain line of argument that says, well, it's all the players' fault. And yes, it is to a certain extent. However, Kevin kind of hits the nail on the head in that there's blame to be attributed to various particular players, i.e. not players within the squad, but players in the whole situation. And one of them has to ultimately be De Boer. I fully see that change can be achieved through sort of evolution of a way that a team plays, the way that a club plays. You know, Man City now play in a very different way to how Man City played when they were in League One 20 years ago. They've sort of evolved over that period, mostly through billions of pounds, but they've evolved and sort of brought in players over long periods. But it takes a really long time. And the problem is, if it takes a really long time and you're doing it on a shoestring at certain points, it can end up with really bad consequences.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also it's the fans that won't let it take a long time as well. Most of the impatience comes from the fans. Your point about the player discontent, I'd like to know who the player was who apparently spoke to the Telegraph, because as Danny Rose found out recently, if you speak to a newspaper without going through a club, you're going to get in a world of trouble. It's very unusual for players to talk to newspapers without going through the club. So either somebody at the club sanctioned that to cause trouble, or somebody at the club, as a player, is a bit of an idiot and is about to leave the club. So I'd like to know who that was. The question there for Mark is a really good question. I think Palace fans don't know the history. We've this thing about it's in the DNA. It's what kept us up for the last 4 seasons. Where I would agree with people is that the thing with 3-4-3 is that can be an aggressive system. What hasn't happened so far this season is that we're not playing it on the front foot. We have lost that aggression. We have lost that commitment, that pace, that power, that passion that we used to have. And that, I don't think that's necessarily because of the system, partly because they're not used to it, but I don't know whether it's how he motivates players, but just because you play that way doesn't mean you can't get in teams' faces. You can't do what we do, and they're just not doing that full stop. We weren't doing that from the kickoff. How many times have we said at home? You see the way Liverpool start their games. And by the way, Jurgen Klopp said that it was more difficult to beat Palace than it was to beat Arsenal last week.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any silver linings, it's that Arsenal got thumped 4-0.
But why were we good at Anfield then?
But it's not. But just see the way Liverpool start games at Anfield. First 25 minutes, it's on the front foot, in your face straight away, and that's nothing to do with the system they play. That's to do with attitude. That's to do with the way they're sent out. If we play 4-4-2, 3-5-1, 4-3-3, 3-4-3, whatever it is, if you go out and you sit back and you're as passive as we were against Swansea, you're waiting for a mistake to happen. Basically, that was Trevor Francis football. That was Dougie Freeman football before he was kicked up the arse and told to sell season tickets and start scoring goals. That was Peter Taylor football. That was wait. That's take a point. Don't get beaten. That was the attitude. You go out and say take a point and then see what happens. And that's got to change. But that's nothing to do with the system. Whether it's the manager, I don't know. But that's definitely got to change.
Whether the word is courage or confidence, to me it doesn't matter what formation you play, because you're going to have courage and confidence regardless. So I'm not sure that I see that the formation is itself responsible for not having whichever of those words he meant to use. I think he used courage. But Mark, I don't go back as far as Arthur Rowe, but I do go back to the Malcolm Allison era, and it's actually when I started supporting the club properly. And I actually I've got this in front of me because I think this is really important for us all as Palace fans to just take a little bit of a breath and look at this. You were asking, I think, after the opening pod, is that the worst start to a season we've ever had? And I remember the first year I went to the first home game. Exactly. Yeah. Our first year back in the second division. So we'd been relegated after 4 years in the top flight. Mm-hmm. First home game. You've got that shot, which at the time, you've got to bear in mind that when Malcolm Allison changed the nickname and changed the colours, there was like rebellion. Yep. I mean, that was not a popular move. He dropped John Jackson, who was the most popular player at the club, one of the most popular players ever, funny enough, into Speroni. The moves he was making were really unpopular. He blooded a whole bunch of new young players, and we lost 4-1 at home to Notts County. A year after we'd been playing the big clubs, we lost 4-1 at home. We lost the next game. We picked up 2 or 3 draws, and I've got it here. We eventually won in November.
Whoa.
Now, the bad news is that we went down that year to the third division. The kind of good news is once we won, we actually kind of carried on winning. And I think somewhere in the second half of the season, we would have finished in like 5th place if it was, it's like a reversal of a Pardew year. But by halfway through the season, we were actually seeing the results. And we were all falling in love with the Malcolm Allison era. It was, but it's something attached to that is it was more exciting. But I remember being at that first game, that Notts County game, and being, I was very young, but being surrounded by people who were, just utterly. I mean, they wanted to just kill the guy there and then. He changed everything, and now we know he changed it for the better. But it was very hard to deal with, and we did not win for a while. Now we look back, and it's the Malcolm Allison lounge, and it's Allison this and Allison that.
Well, Frank won't get till November, will he?
I don't think he'll get to the Burnley match, frankly.
I think I disagree. Well, I think I've said it, and I'll stand by this. I think the Sacco is the benchmark. I think if Sacco comes in, De Boer goes out, basically. But bear in mind, everybody said it took Allardyce 8 games. Yeah, admittedly, halfway through a season, and then he bought how many? He bought 4 players in.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of money.
Yep.
De Boer, it seems, isn't being allowed to do that at the moment.
Not yet.
So
we'll see in 4 days.
If Allardyce gets 8 games, and we were getting worried, but we weren't getting angry, I don't see how De Boer doesn't get.
So why isn't De Boer getting that amount of time then?
Because it's so big. It comes back to what I said last week. Reaction is the right word. It's not. The reaction hasn't started since he came in. The reaction started before he came in. There's a section of Palace fans who simply weren't ready to give him time. There's a section of Palace fans who simply go, well, it's not for the likes of us, that fancy foreign football.
And do you think that would have been different if it was Deitch or someone else?
Absolutely, yeah. It's no, because football fans are the same all over the place. If it was Deitch, there'd be people going, what are we doing? We should have gone for De Boer, we should have gone for Pellegrino, we should have gone for Marco Silva. There's always going to be, but I do think it would be different if we'd gone for Deitch, but also because Deitch would be playing a style of football that's recognisable to a lot of our fans.
And our current squad.
Yeah.
Let's go back to what Andy just said about you don't think he's going to get to Burnley, which is the next game. So you think he won't get time to even rectify what's happened?
Do you think he's gone?
I think he's gone. If players are briefing, or if the press is being briefed by someone connected with players that there's major discontent at a training ground, it's a matter of time. And you've got to look at the timings. The transfer window's just about to close, so there's other priorities right now, you would have thought. And it wouldn't surprise me if he's still gone by the Burnley match.
But why? Why on earth would you get rid of a manager? If you're going to do it, they would have done it on Sunday to give somebody else 4 days. Why on earth would you do that now? Why on earth would you bring a manager in now? We all know who it's going to be. So basically, what you're saying is,
who's going to be?
It'd be Freeman. So what you're saying is, so which manager is going to join us now? The transfer window shut. There isn't a manager in the world you're going to attract to the club. So if they get rid of De Boer, Freeman's our manager now till Christmas or whatever he does, and then.
Well, I think he will be.
Well, you know.
But can I ask the question about I was saying about us being serial daters? We already look really bad for going through managers, even though it hasn't all been our fault.
But that's the way of every club.
But
now.
do you genuinely think that 3 matches? Admittedly, we haven't scored a goal, and under Allison, we were at least scoring some goals. But do you really think 3 matches is it now, and that the fans and the media and everybody else and other footballers would accept that you give somebody 3 games?
You can't sack someone just on the basis of 3 results. That is churlish. However, if those 3 results are in tandem with serial malaise within the club and serial discontent amongst your playing staff, and the club just hasn't taken to individuals, sometimes things don't work out. And sometimes you've got to just bite the bullet early and say, look, this is just not working.
He's been there 6 weeks. The Liverpool performance, after the Liverpool performance, everyone was saying that was really encouraging.
Yeah, including this
said last week, the Liverpool,
it was.
The Liverpool podcast that I did said that was a better Palace performance than the 3 games that we beat. And Jurgen Klopp said, as I said, it was harder to beat Palace than it was to beat.
Obviously, and he's not saying. You're not saying you agree with it. You're just saying you think that that's where it's heading.
Well, no, I think that's where it's heading. I think it's very difficult to come to an informed judgment as to whether or not it's the correct decision unless you actually have an informed view of what's going on that training ground.
Well, you'll never be able to get an informed.
Which you'll never be able to get. So it's very difficult then,
and also
in the
because you
absence
can't
of that, to say whether or not it's the right decision.
You can't compare results with him and without him if we do sack him. But it's hard.
No, I quite agree.
It's hard to, and I'm going to talk about Dougie Freeman briefly in brackets, because all those people. One of the major points I made about Dougie Freeman last week was whether you love him or hate him, he's a divisive figure, right? And all the people who came up to me in the Paulson's Arms and the back of the main stand, the Alpha Weight rather, who didn't seem to understand the word divisive. When I was saying to people, you and I haven't had a crossword for 10 years, and we're arguing about Dougie Freeman, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
You're entitled to your view about Dougie Freeman, I'm entitled to mine. But that divisive figure was brought in, and you can only assume he was brought in as a backup plan in case the ball didn't go wrong. And in that case, that's a level of panic that.
We don't know that. We don't know.
Well, you can make assumptions though, because Dougie Freeman won't even give an interview to Palace TV.
The timing is interesting.
Without anybody telling us what his job is or why he's brought in at this time, then of course you're going to make assumptions. You're going to speculate, and that's what we'll do.
And that's what we do. Of course, that's what we
do.
do.
I would assume.
Yes, so go ahead.
I would assume, given the remit of sporting directors, is generally to conduct transfer negotiations, to be involved in that side of things, more the business side of things. I would be surprised if he's not just doing that. I mean,
but he's on the spot. He's in the building in case there's a roller skate left at the bottom of the stairs from Frank de Boer comes out.
He's not going to be taking training. He's not going to be involved in conditioning of the players.
Yeah, but
he's not going to be involved in the tactical side of things.
Yes, but
the sporting director is there to oversee staffing.
No, Andy, you're being naive. You know full well that if de Boer is sacked, then Dougie Freeman will be taking the.
Well, he'd be a caretaker.
He'll be a caretaker manager, and it'll be until November, December.
No, but I think you've got to separate out those 2 issues. It can be the case that he may succeed De Boer if De Boer is given the heave-ho and is made boss on an interim basis, and it can also be the case at the same time that he was brought in to do a very different job with a very different remit, and then because he's within the organisation, that he's probably, of the people there, you're not going to probably put Sammy Lee up to it because he's tried and not been up to doing that lead man job before, and who knows what Orlando Trustful was like as a manager. I certainly don't. So that's why that will then make intuitive sense, whether or not we like it or not, or whether or not we think he's a divisive figure. But I think you've still got to maintain some separation between, on the one hand, what he's been brought in to do, and on the other hand, what he maybe end up being made to do.